Right, in this lesson we are learning about the nervous system. As you can see, there's so many parts to this, but they are all pretty self-explanatory when we start to talk about them. Right, so the CNS, first of all, is the brain and the spinal cord. That is it. There are no other parts to the central nervous system. However, everything else in the nervous system fits into the peripheral nervous system. Peripheral meaning everything on the outside. So the peripheral nervous system can then be broken down into two, the sensory and the motor nervous systems. Now, sensory makes sense, okay? It is detecting those changes, so those kinds of sensory perception that we talked about, like the eyes and the ears and all those other kinds of things. So we talked about 5 of them. However, everything else fits into the motor category, and that's because it's instigating movement, and that's what it's doing. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's movement in the sense that we are used to. Say, for example, the digestive system fits under the motor neuron rather than the sensory, because even though it's not actually moving the body per se, it is movement inside the body. Now, the motor nervous system is split into 2 as well, the somatic and the autonomic. Now, the auto and autonomic should give you a bit of a hint there, meaning it is the involuntary stuff, whereas the somatic is the voluntary movements. Now, voluntary means, say, I'm talking, I'm scratching my face, I'm moving around, that's all voluntary. The autonomic is back to that idea I just spoke about in terms of, say, the digestive system, the heart beating, regulating that, my breathing. Obviously, I can take control of that when I want to, but generally, if I'm asleep, I want all those kinds of things to be working for me. All right, autonomic is then broken down into the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Sympathetic is also known as our flight or fight or flight, whichever way you want to do it. Parasympathetic is the opposite to this, and they often call it the rest and digest. Now, they're pretty self-explanatory there with the rest and digest. The parasympathetic is kicking into gear when, say, your heart needs to beat faster, when your muscles need to fire up, when you need to have that energy creation in the cells. That is working all the time. They talk about people who have high-powered jobs or just jobs that go for a long time, so teachers. They really rely on their sympathetic nervous system because they're up and going all the time. And when they get to have a break, that's when the parasympathetic nervous system kicks in. So things like passing waste, things like digesting your food come secondary to, say, the fight or flight response, right? If you're eating a meal, you don't want to be worrying about having to fight for your life. However, if you have just eaten a meal and your body wants to do the rest and digest, but you're in a situation where you need to do the fight or flight, your body will prioritize this. That's what they always talk about, say, don't eat food just before you go swimming, because your body is actually trying to kick in the sympathetic response. It's trying to work your muscles and pump your blood around and get your oxygen to your brain and all those other organs. It doesn't want to worry about the rest and digest. So the muscles that are usually automatic as part of your autonomic nervous system that are working through the parasympathetic nervous system, they want to do their job, but they can't because the blood is being provided to all the other parts that are pretty important. All right. So that's that big flow chart. You can see there's a lot of different parts to that. This is a neuron. Isn't it beautiful? This is specifically a motor neuron. Motor meaning it is participating in the movement section of our nervous system. And it's got a number of different parts. So first of all, this here is our cell body. And on a neuron, it's also known as the soma. Okay, so sometimes you see it written differently. In here is our nucleus. Now, all these little projections coming off here, these are called dendrites. And dendron is like the Greek word for tree, so that makes sense. These are all branching out of the soma in lots of different directions. Keep in mind this is not a 2D object, it is a 3D object, and they are absolutely microscopic, and you have millions upon millions of them in your body. So think about these guys kind of coming out in a 3D sense. It is not flat, it is not just in one plane. Now, these dendrites actually pick up different signals. These are the guys reaching out to touch onto another nerve so that that signal can pass from one nerve to the next nerve. they have those projections so they can reach out and grab as many different nerves as possible so that they can pick up as many different signals as possible. If everything was just a one long chain and this particular neuron was only touching one other neuron, it's not going to go very far. Okay, so this long black projection that goes all the way through here, and it's hidden at the moment, it's called the axon. And the axon is the direction in which the nerve signal is going to flow, and it's going to go that way. So in a motor neuron sense, it's going from the soma away from the soma this way. Okay, so the signal is being picked up on the dendrites from other neurons. It's sending a message. The message is received here. It is processed through the soma and then all the way down through the axon. Now the axon is covered by these green things here, and what these are chunks of myelin. Myelin's like a white fatty substance, and you need to think about it as, say, the insulation on an electrical wire, right? So the plastic casing around the electrical wire, we have that on every single nerve. These little red guys in here are called Schwann cells, and they're tiny little cells that sit near the axon and create this myelin, okay? They are covering our cells for us. They are simple, tiny little individual cells, and that's their only job, okay? And they only make myelin, and that myelin is acting as an insulator. Now, if we keep going down, that message is being sent down here. If you think about if we don't have this myelin, what can happen is that the signal doesn't know how to go down this axon effectively. If you think about, say, as the insulator, if you cut the plastic wire off a cable, off an electrical wire, you are going to have that signal, that electricity, jump out from everywhere. Same thing's happening here. If you talk about diseases like multiple sclerosis, they are demyelinating diseases. That means they are removing the myelin from around the nerves, and that can mean that the signal fires all over the place. And that's exactly what happens in MS. They can have twitches, they can have, I say muscle twitches, sorry, they can have signals that don't travel to where they need to be. All right, so we're going to get all the way down here to the axon terminal, terminal meaning the end, and obviously this is the end of the axon, and that is where these bits are going to attach to, say, another dendrite from another cell, right? So you might have another cell body here and another axon that's traveling that way, and it's covered in myelin, and it's going to go to these axon terminals on another one, and that message is going to be sent all the way through and all the way through and to where it needs to be. So it's only in one direction everything is going. Right? That's a motor neuron. But we have other kinds of neurons. Let's have a look at these ones. We've got sensory neurons and we've also got interneurons. Right? Just going to focus it. Now, a sensory neuron does exactly what you imagine. That's the kind of neurons that are picking up signals from wherever. It might be sensory neurons that are in our eyes. It might be sensory neurons in our skin. Now, they're very different, but they have all the same things. So here's our soma, here's our cell body, here's our dendrites, here's our axon terminal, so we know that the signal is going this way. Here is all of our myelin. And you can see the axon actually extends right from up here all the way down, and it's covered in myelin all the way down. Right? If we compare that to our interneuron, its cell body is smack bang in the middle, as opposed to, say, the sensory neuron, which has it sitting out to the side. And this is the only part that we would consider axon, because it's the only part that has the myelin coverage in it and the Schwann cells doing that job. But same idea, these are still dendrites, these are still axon terminals, this is still a soma, and we still do have myelin. It's just about how they are configured that is different. Okay?